Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, gentlemen, and a happy Tuesday.
There's that voice. I miss.
Feels like Wednesday or Thursday. I wish it was.
Same. It's been a long week for 2 days already.
Yeah.
All right. Well, jumping in today, our main topic will be talking about our content lifecycle management series that we've been doing for a while now. That's Microsoft has put this out recently. We're going through part 3 about developing and managing content. We're going to go through that section next. All right. Jumping in, let's do some news here. What do you got for us, Tommy? We have an update from the Microsoft Fabric blog. What do you got there?
A pretty major update. CI/CD with warehouses and Microsoft Fabric, and there's really 4 major features here that Microsoft is releasing today. And is one, Fabric Git integration with warehouses, which is awesome. Really excited to see that. Deployment pipelines as well. For automating schema changes around different stages. But there's also 2 other ones I think people heavy in the SQL world are going to find fascinating. It's going to be SQL project support and also DBT integration. And those are more, I would say, developer SQL based. That is a pretty big update, especially for those who are pretty lenient or dependent on warehousing.
Yeah, I mean, I see the reason for DBT. I don't love it. It just feels like it's a lot of extra work unless you have the right project where you're scaling out a lot of items. I've been working with some companies that are using DBT, and it's interesting to see how it's being integrated. But it feels like it's more of it's a very common pattern if you're using Databricks. People like to use DBT across Databricks. So need to see the integrations coming. I really do like the fact that it's now added into the Git provider, or you're providing, which is now we can use Azure DevOps or GitHub, which is very nice options there. Yeah, we'll see where this one's going to go. I'm very happy that there's better automation integration with the deployment pipelines. Just feels like deployment pipelines just don't quite do what I want all the time. There needs to be some more enhancements, I think, in the future for how deployment pipelines will work to develop
Especially
this.
Now that we have Git.
Yes, I think it's changing my perspective of like what it should be doing.
Yeah.
I feel like it should be doing more now because we have Git integration.
This is actually pretty funny. I've been talking with my wife about training and content. She's like, so you've done all the, this was probably a few weeks ago. She's like, so you don't have to make any more slides or training sessions, right? I'm like, actually, I have to recreate everything. So I had recordings for deployment pipelines. Not that it's gone, but there's a whole series around Git. And obviously everything around here, it's like, well, remember what I did like 3 years ago? I basically have to do that again now.
Yeah, it's constant changing.
Yeah.
The life of a trainer.
The life
of training as part of your repertoire.
Yeah.
I don't know how people keep up with it, honestly. There's so much stuff changing. It's the UI changes, the interactions change. There's so many features coming out now. It's hard to keep up with things.
See, this is where I think the strength of someone with ADD. Oh, another thing? Oh, I need to find it out. I think so. It worked really well.
Otherwise, Lord, let me redo it. I knew I could do it better the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't share that same passion with stuff I've already done.
I'll put more details around this new database projects in the warehouse with using Git. There's actually a nice little article, a little Learn Microsoft documentation that supplements the blog post as well. So I'll put that also in the chat as well. All right, Tommy, let's do a quick beat from the street here. You've got some thoughts on AI.
Yeah, so this is actually coming from 2 places that I think made it worthy for a beat on the street. From a few client conversations, asking a lot more questions than previous, and then also, honestly, just from the industry itself. And I'll share the industry one since it's kind of out there, not private. For those who are baseball fans, and this is you may watch some commercials, and it seems like every technology company has an AI commercial now. But I'm realizing not all of them have to do with AI. Google has one. They're like, hey, 4% more strikeouts equals 5% more hot dog sales. Google AI. I'm like, that's just statistics. And so this trend started happening. And then I'm talking a lot of clients just about that. Like, what can we do for AI? I think, Seth, I did send you the required reading around AI. And I'm finding that in the forecast that I think we're going to get into an AI bubble. And I hate saying this, but I think we're getting to this point where it's AI everything. It's AI is going to be stamped on Salesforce, stamped on, I mean, like Yelp. It's like you have to have some AI integration. And the same way that my clients, and I'm sure your own organizations out there are probably talking about what can we do with AI
Hmm?
without understanding what it is. Two other aspects of this that again, I don't want to say concerned, but are just kind of leading up to this. Zuckerberg from Meta, who's big in the AI,
Yep.
and Google's CEO basically said the same thing. They said, we would rather right now heavily overinvest in the infrastructure because the amount of GPUs you need, the amount of infrastructure you need, than underinvest. This is almost the use case where you're finding there's a lot of really cool things you could do with AI, but there's still not really a market for it in terms of what is the product here. Like everything's open source, everything, but there's not really something I'm going to actually sell to someone yet. So
Interesting.
I'm curious what you guys hear, because I'm hearing somewhat of the same beat, the same rhythm from a few of the projects I'm working on, a few of the clients. And I want to hear if you're kind of sensing anything similar.
Well, I
That
feel like
that was a
go
lot
ahead.
of sensing. So,
Yeah.
what aspect
we
do you
will be
want
your
us to sense
sensei.
on?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what you guys are here for the filter.
Oh, okay.
So let's just go into the
Go ahead.
aspect of everything AI. We need to integrate AI, but again, without the clear picture of what you're actually going to sell or what actually the effective result's going to be. We just need AI.
I think people are still discovering where to put it, honestly. I think I read a recent Gartner article that said, AI is interesting, especially the generative side, right? Summarize this article, generate something from something else. I think that's useful, and it can be used in very specific use cases. But I think the article is kind of really pointing at the real value for companies is the collection of data into a single area, getting more access to your data, and the idea that you're going to be able to apply algorithms. To your point, Tommy, it's just statistics. It's easier to use. It's closer to where you need your data to be. There's going to be a lot of algorithm improvements, and those will also produce a lot of really good value here too. But I think everyone's trying to lump in that statistics or maths or throwing a lot of things at the computer to do the AI-based things. Where I'm very excited, and I've definitely talked to data scientists about this, and the ones that I've talked to have totally disagreed with me on this one. But there's something to say for being able to throw a computer at lower cost and a whole bunch of algorithms at a bunch of data and say, figure it out, computer, test, hyper-parameterize the data, figure out what is actionable and what is correlated and what is not. Yeah, you need a person there to kind of prepare and get the data ready. But to be honest, it's cheaper to run every single algorithm through a computer overnight than it is to pay a person to find the right algorithm and tune it exactly the way you want. So I don't know, Tommy. Maybe this is a solution looking for a problem potentially. But when I go to code and VS Code and Databricks, and when I'm seeing code and I'm asking for recommendations or patterns or things that show up, it's pretty good. So I don't know. I don't think it's a bubble per se, but I do think there's a lot of hype around it. And if I'm thinking like you're an Adobe, a Microsoft, a Google, if you don't have this bolted into your product, I think people are going to physically leave because they're just excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts, Seth?
Well, man, it's a hype bubble, is what it is,
Mm-hmm.
right?
The Gartner,
Because like something was really telling in what you just said, right? Or at least that I heard, which was sentiment around the challenges and no one really knowing what, like the challenges of finding the appropriate area for AI and then like developing on it, and just the ambiguity of it all and nothing really being out there. And then the converse of that, sane consumers are going to leave or not use companies for not using AI. Do you realize how much of a conflict that is, like of those two things? And that's what is so frustrating to me. And we've talked about this a little bit, Tommy, in the past, right? Where I think what's happening in organizations, a lot of them anyway, is you have every company wants it as a differentiator, right? So instantly, to your point, Tommy, yes, you're going to see some things that is legit just statistics or legit just things that you can do in training models and doing some things that have been
Yes.
out there for forever and a day in data science. That's not AI, but they're going to call it AI, right? It's the predictor. It's predicting my forecast. And well, yeah, but that's just algorithms. That's just math, right? You're
Right.
not doing anything special and fancy. Like, so there's going to be tons of stuff to wade through, right? From a consumer's perspective, because AI is the buzzword. It's the thing that everybody wants to sell. Is that to say that pursuit of like leveraging like large language models or some of the things that AI is accelerating for us in business is not worth it? No, I think tons of companies are spooling up tons of ideas and POCs and trying to like leverage where and how to plug AI in for business value. And one of those for companies selling something is saying like, yeah, we leverage this and this is how we do it. The challenge with that though is, and what's so frustrating is AI leverages well-formed sets of data, right? It still has to categorize it into meaning before it starts spitting out like answers to internal or customers, where it's like those answers have to be 100% accurate. And that's where I think some of the challenges of this coming in. Like, I'm assuming tons of companies have POCs stood up. What I'm also assuming is they're not getting the results that they want, and there's no way they can productionize it or put it in a place that is going to shape the direction of their business yet. And that's where also, I would imagine in many cases, they're realizing that if you haven't invested in the data infrastructure and consolidating all your data, guess what? That's step one, right? Like, you got to get this stuff into a place where you can start to make meaning out of it, or put it in buckets that if you're going to leverage an LLM, like it knows how to navigate your ecosystem. Like if it's going to go look for documentation on something and provide an answer, like there can't be 10 versions of it. There's got to be one, or it has to know how to grab the one, or, I mean, there's so many different challenges of like the output, right? Everybody's focused on, and if you put this in a different context, everybody looks at what? It's the report. It's the delivered thing. They have absolutely no idea the complexity of everything underneath that has to be there in order for the thing to work. And ultimately, like with AI, man, those engines, right? Everything that's doing ripping across all this data, like making meaning out of things. And in the unstructured realm, I think of a lot of business, I think it's I don't think people are getting it to work. Where we've seen success is in very well structured areas like code, right? Coding tool, like there, almost every tool you see like has the assistant or the prompt or the help me make my code, because there's defined parameters for that, right? There's only so much you can do within the code framework for AI to have to figure out, to like deliver you a better and better response every single time. And I think the value add for streamlining those processes is probably going to be much more in front of what the market in general is throwing out there from like AI, right? So it's like it's a hype bubble right now, I think.
You're hitting the nail on the head. And I think to your point, the coding is excellent, but right now that's really dominated by the people who are already doing coding, like GitHub, Databricks, and what they're doing. But then you think about all these other companies, what Meta is doing, what Copilot is, right? Right now, it's like, okay, how are we actually going to make this? And then there's the companies who are going to dedicate themselves to AI. What's going to be where are we going to generate the revenue? Like I guarantee you, all these companies right now are losing hand over fist dollars on the amount of money they've invested into the GPUs and the Copilot compared to what they're actually getting out of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, like that's a different ball game in my estimation, because it's like one of those mega companies lands on the thing and you're billions. It's billions instantly, right? Like people are going to clamor for it. They're going to want it.
Yeah.
And like an interesting scenario in my head, you think about the Microsoft ecosystem. Maybe in the future, something as extremely expensive or an add-on like Purview all of a sudden becomes super cheap and free because the AI version of that is, hey, do you want to click this button? And I'll tell you your whole ecosystem.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I'll pay. Wait, speed to what? Like, you're going to charge me 5,000 a month and I just hit this button? Sure. As opposed to, I hit it, but then I have to go build it and configure it and categorize and do all the things myself. Like,
I think
there's tons of opportunity there.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Seth, on this one. I really agree with your point there around if you don't compete in this space, if you don't supply the infrastructure, there's a barrier to entry to play in this space. There's a barrier to entry to make large language models. There's a barrier to entry to render and output results. And I think if you don't play in the space, if you don't have, I think their point, Tommy, is well taken. They're not going to be able to invest in the infrastructure. Someone's going to come in and build a new chip, a more efficient way of doing it, a model that takes less time to train. And if they can return a prompt in half the cost that you can, there's like another price war happening here, I think, at some level, right?
Yeah.
Sure. If you can run a prompt at $1 and I can run it at 50 cents, great. That makes I'm more efficient. And so
that's a good point.
I think they're going to continue to keep, and this is all new. I think to your point also, Seth, is we don't know what people are going to produce with this, right? The technology is there. It's doing some incredible things, but what does this really mean? What does it look like? And how does the collective training of these models really going to impact things long term? I don't think we know yet. And so this is a lot of people saying, look, if we don't prepare for it, no one will be able to innovate and create good ideas. One thing I will say, all of this stuff takes an inordinate amount of energy. It's all very expensive from an energy consumption standpoint. I think in order for the US to stay competitive in this space, we need better, cheaper, more renewables of energy so we can bring the price of energy down. I think if you did that, it would be immensely helpful for a lot of these organizations. And I think you see really big companies like Microsoft trying to say, hey, we're buying green credits, we're building data centers that are all green, and they produce as much as they consume. I think that's the right approach, because you can't have these large data centers just consuming all the power from everything. It's going to take a lot of effort to make these things work well.
Take it from me. I have a fan in my office now for my PC because I'm running a ton of local things and it gets warm.
There you
my
go.
room gets warm from the PC. So.
You don't need a heater now.
I think
you're ready for the winter.
One of the things I want to stress is I'm not poo-pooing the pursuit of AI in businesses. What I'm challenging is the hype that you can't skip the line in this stuff. You can't. And I think that's why you're not seeing companies everywhere just be like, oh, we don't need to do anything. It's AI, right? It's so much simpler and faster. AI, right? You're seeing it in spots. We're seeing it and it helps our lives so far, right? So let's pursue it. 100% agree with pursuit of it. It's just temper the hype cycle, because this is not like a normal technology thing that once you implement it, you can say, yeah, we're a Power BI shop.
Right.
Congratulations. What does that mean? Oh, we built a report. Well, you're an organization of 1,000 people. People think that it's all over your organization now, right? Yeah. With AI, it's not oh yeah, we turned on AI.
Okay.
Can't really do that. What does that mean? So just a little pessimistic about the hype cycle thing. Not liking it, I guess, because it cheapens, or hopefully it whiplashes around to the point where your organizations who still don't realize data is important need to really get on the bandwagon and understand that there's a lot of data engineering work that has to happen to set these things up for success.
Yeah. My last thought here, the semi-equivalent kind of example is you look at the .com bubble, so to speak, and I'm not saying it's going to be the same thing. The internet didn't go away after the bubble burst. We knew the internet was here to stay, but there was such a hype around what we can do, all these things, and a lot of companies weren't ready for it. One of the biggest, I think, stocks at the time was a pets.com, or delivering pet food, but we were too early in the game in the early 90s. The bubble burst, but guess what? we're still using the internet. We're still using a lot of websites. So I think there's somewhat of an equivalent. I don't think to the same degree, but I think we're going to see the same thing where AI is not going away, but we're definitely going to see that, to your point, Seth. It's not necessarily going to be everyone being AI, especially when it comes a lot more formulated, because the realization of, well, there's a lot of foundational things we need in order for this to work.
Yeah.
I'm really, to be honest, I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to be really good.
Mhm.
I think it's going to be very interesting, and I think it's going to make. It's already making things a lot harder to discern what's going on, because people can easily run a video through these things and have it auto-generate content. I think what you're going to find is a lot of the AI is going to generate a lot of new video. So video seems to be like the main media that everyone wants to use and consume, because now we have little video players on our phone for everything. So I think everything's going towards this video media consumption, summarized, trying to deliver distilled information quickly. It's impressive what it can do, honestly.
Didn't we experiment with taking our podcast and making it international?
Yeah, we did. We tried to change the language on it, right? Let's do the Spanish podcast.
Yeah. Benvenuti a PBIP. Italian version of the podcast.
I mean, you could do it. I don't know how well it would. I don't know. I can't check it. I can't see if it's right or not. If you swear to people the whole time, I don't know. Not sure. But I don't know. It's very interesting.
Anytime we have this conversation in any forum, I always conclude my side with, since this is a recording, or since when I'm talking into a microphone and will live on, and AI is listening, I look forward to the day when our new overlords take over. Just so you know what's on about.
Hey, I'm on your side.
I personally, machines, am not a fan of Neo.
That's funny. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
That's good. All right. Well, with that, let's jump into our main topic for today. So, really good conversation. That makes me laugh. I'm enjoying that. So let's jump into our main topic for today. The main topic today is going to go down we're going to call part 3. We've been kind of talking about the content and lifecycle management for a while. This is an article that has been written by the Microsoft team. We believe it's been written by, or has influence of, the Kurt Bueller on there. So we love all the articles that come out from Kurt. So we're really excited about that. This is part 3, developing and managing content. So, Tom, you want to give us maybe a bit of a summary of what we're talking about today, and then we'll kind of dissect the article a little bit more.
Absolutely. So yes, this is our third part in a series around content lifecycle management, CLM for short. First one, we went over an overview. Our last part was around the planning and designing the content, the infrastructure around it. And today's all about developing the content, how you're going to develop it, the file types, and then where you're actually going to put that pathway. This is really focused a lot on Git integration, talking about using SharePoint, using what types of files. Are you going to make it binary, our old friend PBIX? Or are we going to go into PBIP? Are we going to go into a lot more developer-centric tooling? Regardless of the path that's chosen here, after we've done our planning, it's how do we develop it, whether it's individually, on a team, or centralized.
I like it. I think that does change depending on how large your team is and what occurs there. I also think I think part of this consideration for me dovetails into, how are you going to maintain it? What's the maintenance of this going to look like? When do you need changes? We've done a number of monolithic, I'll call them the monolithic data models.
Mm-hmm.
We threw everything in it, and it just got really difficult to manage, understand, work with it. And so we decided, okay, is there a logical way to break that model into sections or pieces or areas that make sense to those business users, but not have to provide this massive, really complex model? Because sometimes weird things happen with DAX, and you really have to really understand exactly what you're doing and understand if there's any weird relationships or something in there that you want to be able to cleanly adjust. So I think a simpler model is easier to maintain. But let's get into the rest of the article here. So, all right, deciding how to develop. I think we should just kind of walk from top down, would be my approach here. So is that kind of how we want to take this article?
Yeah, again, you'd have to rip through it.
There's a lot. There's a lot here.
The one caveat I think I do want to point out here, though, is this in this develop and manage content section, and I'm not going to be critical, but some of this is still future-ish, right? Like,
Oh.
just be aware that some of these things are not GA, right? So I don't like the fact that it's like
that's
presented
true.
as such, because it's like, oh, use this, and it's like, yeah, but that's not GA. Like, there's still limitations to that. So I'm supposed to like start implementing processes and standards around CI/CD when like these tools aren't even where I need them all to be yet, and like that's my
That's
only
a good
caveat.
point.
So as we read it, some of this
Let's
is not
highlight
full
the
GA
things.
yet.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think there's a big part, to kind of point, Mike, decide how to develop content, which is kind of the first main section here. This actually was something that I wanted to bring up right off the bat too. One of the things that, and I'm going to quote here: when developing semantic models and reports using Power BI Desktop, we recommend use the PBIP files instead of PBIX files.
Okay. Note. Warning. This is in preview.
I know.
This is literally the first note on this is already. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Okay, keep going, Tommy.
No. Yeah, and when developing semantic models using XML tools, we recommend use tabular model Tyndall, also in preview, instead of .bim files. This is my first, and again, I'm not going to say my caution or concern, but I want to raise this to you guys. If you're working with a team who's saying, how should we develop content? And I'm going to say, regardless of the skill level of the team, because I think at this point, that would you say your primary recommendation, the primary path you go is PBIP? Because right now, that's not what I would say.
Well, there's an interesting feature. So the PBIP format, for those who don't know, is a way of dissecting or taking a report and making a bunch of little tiny files that describe everything. So the PBIP format is now the new Microsoft direction on which they're going to head. They're going to do all these new things with the Power BI. It's basically Power BI project file format. So the BIM, or the traditional data model, gets broken into a whole bunch of these Tyndall form files, which Tyndall tabular model definition language. I think it's and that's defined as, okay, here's a table. Here's all the properties and columns and measures inside this table. Here's another definition for all the expressions that are going to make tables. So it's a lot easier for us to digest and make changes to the models and things. While I like this, while this does make sense, to me, there's a little bit of a missing gap between what that does, the service, and how to publish things. So the PBIP format is useful. However, you now have a collection of a lot of little files that exist somewhere. And unless you're using an integrator like Git or something that's going to be able to track all those individual files of things, it actually gets a lot more challenging for the end user, where they were typically just using a PBIX file. That was typically what people would just use. So I agree with you, Tommy. I think this is the right direction. I think we're really building. This feels like what they're trying to do with like Power Query or other visual graphical interfaces that live on top of a lot of code stuff. It feels the same, right? Hey, we're going to build the structure of the code. We're going to try and make it as easy as possible for you to just work with a single file or a collection of things that are just, it feels natural and seamless. So I think that's where they're going here. Me personally, I'm not a beginner developer. So since I'm not a beginner developer, I love it. I think this is great.
Yeah.
I want to use it all the time. I want to have every project beyond this. And what I think I'm finding from talking with customers, there's a bit of resistance because we're not quite comfortable yet. We don't really understand Git. We don't know how to use it yet. The business intelligence groups don't have the maturity that I think Microsoft wants them to have, or advanced analytics teams should have. And we're getting there. There's a lot of business users. I mean, I keep trying to make this point clear when I talk in MVP meetings. Hey, be aware, we're bringing a bunch of business users to highly technical things. We still got to think about making it as easy as possible. I think there's also a missed opportunity with the PBIP format. Why not, in deployment pipelines, expose to me the PBIP format for reports, the PBIP format for semantic models? We can see some of that right now, but everything should be Tyndall. Like I should be able to look at, anywhere in the system, if I'm editing reports online, I should be able to have a code editor that shows up and shows me, here's what the visuals are doing on this page. I should be able to see everything on the page as if it was in Tyndall format. So I can, I have all the UI, the GUI there, and then I can also go into the code side and just modify the code. Are these visuals aligned on the same XY axis? I should be able to go into the code and just look at what the numbers are and just type them in if I need to. That I think is very easy to do. And it's the experience that I get when I use a pipeline, because I have code that defines the pipeline. I want to see the code that defines the things. Anyways, it's very interesting. What are your thoughts, Seth?
There were a lot of them. So there's a couple things. One, we're talking future stuff, right? These articles item. I think are designed for future things. Tyndall is going to be at some point the de facto standard. It's not right now. You have to cut over to it. Like there's a lot in here that isn't ready for what the base core thing for like content lifecycle management is supposed to address, which is what?
Versioning of different files.
Reliability.
Yeah.
Right. So when the tool sets or tools or all the things you're telling me I need to use are not in a state of full reliability, then like, okay, great. We're talking future state. We're plagued with a problem. We talk about things right away when they're released. I think this is one of those like technical documents that like it's got to be out there, right? You have to say that this is how you're going to manage this ecosystem. They're providing information to us to digest. But right now, in context, there are some pieces of this that are not production pushed. They're not GA. Mm-hmm. Can you use them in the right hands, like you, Mike? Yeah, you can. Are you going to roll in business intelligence teams to things that they don't understand the nuance? They can't, like, there's a lot of ambiguity. No, you're not, because that's not introducing a reliable deployment process into your company, which is what you want to do. I think the challenge for it, so having said that, pushing and saying that all business intelligence teams need to go down this route, I don't know if I disagree with, because in layman's terms, like I think there's some very like straightforward deployment process things through using all these tool sets, right? I think at first there's a knee jerk of like, oh my gosh, like we're adding so much complexity because you guys are talking about ripping apart these files and like there's so much nuance and we can do all this code check-in and code checkout. Like it doesn't have to be like full on, like you're using every aspect of this, right? To leverage it, to get value out of it. Correct. However, you can go deeper. I think the only pushback I have in there is, or maybe challenge point, is one of the value adds to a business for Power BI was speed to insight. And everything we're talking about here is reliability, but that's IT, that's technology. Yeah. We've always done that. And you have to in the Fabric realm, especially when you start building data infrastructure to scale. But those are two different things that like are uniquely butting up in here, because is there some processes that a business intelligence team runs through here in a light version, and then there's also the heavy version, because those are like the certified production level, like the entire company uses these reports versus the business unit or the person. Because I think there has to be a differentiation here, because you can't lose, I think, one of the largest value adds of business intelligence, which is speed to turnaround. And we have tools that allow you to quickly produce results for people. And you can't, like, we can't go the opposite direction with CI/CD or this content lifecycle.
And you're pressing a major button that I completely agree with. Even if we made the assumption right now that all of these things were GA, that they were already generally available, you would have to look at the Fabric skills matrix, right? Where there's a lot of, and I think this is earlier to Mike's point, there's a lot of assumptions here on the level of experience and skill of that team, because you can't be just one person on the team who knows all this. This has to be everyone who has to be familiar with looking at code, looking and understanding the process with Git. The rest of the article goes into how we'd actually integrate Git, but this is not just something you just turn on and do a quick session, an hour session with your team and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Start converting your files and just continue as business as usual. This is a complete process change, a complete tooling change, the software and the what you're actually accessing. So you would have to do a full skills assessment. Mike, to your point, or I think to all of us, when I see an article like this, I'm jogging down the steps to try it out. But again, we're also more on the developer side, or we've been in the game for longer, or we're just that nerdy. Even if I'm working with a client, I'm not going to start developing in PBIP because I'm going to eventually have to hand this off. And if
Yes.
there are right,
Yes.
so
I'm going to make sure that they agree, and I will show them the
Yeah.
values of what that looks like. And I do
Yeah.
think, to your point, Tommy, there's like an easy win and there's a more complicated, elaborate version of this. The easy win is, all right, just turn on Git and just have your workspace sync to it. Great. Anytime you change something, it'll tell you when it looks different. Just sync it up. Boom. Backups. Like simple. That I like. I mean, that feels like a lot more of what we really wanted when we were trying to do SharePoint files publishing to the service. So I like that part. I also think that the addition of the Git integration allows for web authoring. So even though I may not actually be doing the full PBIP format, I'm at least synchronizing my files with some sort of Git. I think the web authoring is much less of a risk to me now because I can actually have copies of things. I can see it's being checked in. I can see that there's content being created there. So the only downside of this is, to your point, Seth, Git and GitHub, it's still kind of a little bit more preview, and not everything's covered yet. You build a data flow, still not covered inside Git. So yes, most of the artifacts you're trying to produce can be saved over to Git, but not all of them. So you have to kind of choose wisely what you're going to be putting in there, because some of it might not stick with the Git repo.
Yeah, a lot of this is, I feel, a bit of a copy and paste with general Git, not necessarily has to do with Fabric, in terms of like one of the things they talked about is like release history. I'm like, I don't think we're doing release history, or we're doing version history. We're not doing types of releases with Git integration. I think it'd probably be a good point here. I think we can touch on this all day, but there's the next aspect here is talking about setting up workspaces. And
I like this one.
This
Yeah.
another one. I'm intrigued to get your guys' thoughts, because again, this goes into probably the technology that you're going to choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is another. I think the questions that are asked in this next section are really relevant. How many workspaces do you actually need? Knowing that the more workspaces you build, to your point, Seth, we're now just slowing down the development process. If you add more workspaces, if I have workspaces for all my models, I have workspaces for all my reports, and I'm doing dev, test, and prod, that's now 6 workspaces that I must manage. So we need to make sure that whatever we're trying to choose, if we're going to increase the number of workspaces, let's make sure we have the right design of that in our pattern so that everything just kind of works smoothly together across those things. So I really like the questions. Will you separate the workspaces by an item type, reports or models? Will you have access to each workspace? Do you need to have control?
Do you separate out prod to only the person who needs to deploy, or
Yeah. So like, I mean, there is likely and this is one thing I think that Microsoft is not doing a great job of communicating, but I think it's there. Dev, test, prod. Yes, there are different lakehouses, artifacts, semantic models, but the data itself in each of those environments very much could be different. You're pointing at dev server versus test server versus prod servers. If you're doing your design right, there's 3 different places. Now, in the business realm, I feel like those are all pointing at prod. Probably. Dev, test, prod, because dev is building things, test is still, but I mean, it's all, it's the same data each time. But when you're in like healthcare or HIPAA or financial, you can't be showing all that information in dev and test. You have to have some mock environment that's doing a simulation of data before you get to production. So you actually have to limit access to that production environment. So I do think that is something that's important here. Again, this is the difference between, is this internal reporting or is this something you're going to give out to an external client or something a bit more sensitive? I think that also changes the pattern we're designing here. So we're blurring the line very heavily between IT and business, I think, in this space.
I would love to see more here around the workspaces for the type of content. And the more I'm thinking about this, for whatever reason, Mike, you kind of not hit a nerve, but triggered something for me. It makes a lot of sense to build the content or the workspace development, the structure of what you're going to build solely around the content that you're going to do. Because to your point, there's probably a lot more use cases where your lakehouse is a gold standard, or your semantic models are maybe a gold standard, where they're not going to change rapidly across each one. It's going to be the definitions, the reports themselves that need that dev test prod. But if you're dealing with a lake house, if I'm a team dealing, maybe the business dealing with the lake house, maybe I only have 2 lake house workspaces, the test and prod. Maybe I just have one where everything's flowing through, because one, I don't want to duplicate everything. I want to make this as easy as possible, rather than trying to point my parameters in a pipeline or from the Git point of view. But when I'm dealing with semantic models or more rapid development, that's where the dev test prod probably makes more sense. I don't know if that's making too much sense, but I think the gist of it is, if I'm dealing with more, let's say, overlapping content, lake houses and gold semantic models, certified semantic models, that's probably staying in the same place a little more and not going from workspace to workspace.
Yeah, I agree with that one a lot.
I mean, on the flip side, though, you also have other teams when we're talking about Fabric, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like data engineering teams, like these workspaces could be just the straight data, like ecosystem. And in those cases, it makes a ton of sense from, I guess, getting more involved in Git integration where you're deploying changes from one environment to another, especially rollback.
So here's a question. At this point in time, and everything we've done with CLM, my opinion here is the how you organize and structure the workspace development is the most important right now. I feel like this would be the one that would cause the most confusion or set you up for the most success.
Say that again. I'm not sure.
How are you So how are you going to organize your workspaces is right now probably the most critical juncture of what you decide to do and what you build.
Most critical juncture.
Juncture is maybe the wrong word, but the critical part I'm going to lean into.
I would say it's a very large, like if you're talking to this article and saying what of this is very important, I think it's a very large. At the beginning of a project, it's extremely important to define how many environments and what is your build pattern for those environments.
Build pattern.
And because even down below they have like, here's some patterns that may be of interest to you. Here's approach 1, dev test prod. Here's approach number 2, dev test prod. And there's different patterns on, okay, this environment or this test and space is only for validation. We're not going to build things here. In pattern number 1, you could build things in the test environment that you then potentially get approval on and then move forward to production. So I think the idea here is there's a lot of flexibility in what you can do. The build of these things, how you architect the workspaces, highly dictates how much effort it's going to take you to get something out the door later on and what process you're going to follow. So maybe I'm trying to say it differently. I'm trying to say you need to focus on documenting what is your process and making it very clear and very well known. This is how we're going to develop. I think that's the number one most important thing. I also echo or agree that there's going to be a lot of content that's just in a workspace, one workspace, and it's a combined model and report all in one. There's going to be a lot of content like that. When you start getting more certified in your levels of content, or if you're trying to be more metered around regular releases, consistency of quality, like there's a push to move away from a single workspace to more of these structures that allow for more checking and development, and you're trying to separate the development away from the checking and the production pieces. So
you know what I want?
There's a balance there.
You know what I want as you're describing that? I want something in the UI that lets me categorize workspaces. It's a mess right now. And you just opened up this huge realm of like, as an admin, or if I want to organize what's going on in this ecosystem called Fabric, right? I can have a workspace for anything, any flavor now. Data only, test, dev, prod, UAT, like production, it's business, it's whatever. How do I know? How do I know what something is in this ecosystem? But just by naming, right? Give me some way to categorize workspaces, even if it's on an admin level, right? Like, and it doesn't even have to be like you pick it for me. Let me assign labels, right? And potentially you could argue that that's a workspace name or something, but I don't think it would need to be. I would just like, hey, like give me my icons of, or not icons because I want to report on it, right? I want to monitor like who's building workspaces. What does this look like? What is my ecosystem of data look like in that bucket perspective? Because there's so much that we can do with workspaces, right? Like we were just saying, it can be like the type of workspace. Is it permission related? Is it deployment related? Is it where I have data related? Is it my models? Is it my reports? Is it my buckets of workspaces that I keep monitoring for the business and say, this is, a business owned workspace? Because the content within there is going to be wildly different. I don't know. It's just a thought that when you were describing all these things, I'm like, man, I want this thing that lets me report on my ecosystem.
I want to unpack what you're saying there a little bit more. It feels like what you're saying to me, Seth, is you're saying you want domains. It sounds like you're kind of describing that a little bit.
Well, domains are not. I see what he's saying with from the categorization point of view. Domains are, according to how Microsoft's setting it up right now, is like departmental based, like the type of content for the business.
You're making an assumption that's a departmental based, but it does not have to be departmental based.
I'm doing the documentation.
I mean, domains,
but I know you're right. Yeah.
Domains are just an owner of a collection of workspaces all grouped together. So Microsoft is calling them business domains, but that doesn't mean like IT. So to your point, Seth, right? Here's all what you're just, when you said some of the things, there were some words there that triggered thoughts in my mind, right? These are the collection of workspaces that do data.
Are associated with domains. Maybe, maybe you manage that through domains.
So I think there's something there, and I'm the reason I'm getting into this because I'm unpacking domains a little bit right now is because I think domains are a delegation of. Okay, so there's a lot of things in Power BI where we're starting to shift responsibility from one team to the next. This has been a challenge already from IT like for a million years. It's just been around a fight between, okay, IT, you produce this, and then you get access to this in the business. Domains feel like that collection of workspaces for me right now where, hey, we're going to build this bronze, silver, gold lakehouse data things. Okay, well, who owns that? Who's the domain of what that may be? And that may be made up of many different workspaces. You might even have dev, test, prod in there. It doesn't matter. It means there is a domain that is IT centric. The domain can collect all the workspaces together, and you can even, how do you want, as an admin, how do you want to manage the domains, or how do you want to manage the workspaces? Well, that's, if it's departmental, like they're describing in the article around domains, you can then associate that team, that department with their own fabric SKU. And now you can handle, here's what the IT organization will do and own. You get an F64 SKU, build all the data through Gold. That's your responsibility. You own it. You pay for it. It's out of your budget. It's your space. Then you can have a whole bunch of these other semantic models or other domains like HR or finance. And then what I would call those is now you have another delineation to, you can delegate some authoritative properties to that collection of workspaces.
Yep.
You can allow them to turn on some admin features, right? I don't know. That's the things that triggered that in my mind.
Domain, subdomain, I just ripped it up real quick. It's exactly what I would want. So they have it.
Problem solved.
Yeah.
Good job, Microsoft.
Thanks.
But it's not implemented in a tagging. Like one thing that domains does not do, which I think does make sense is, one thing that domains will do is there's no concept of tagging or having multiple workspaces in different domains. So you get a domain, the workspace can only be associated with some domain, or there's a subdomain that lives that you can put it in the subdomain, which is then part of the broader ecosystem.
Yeah.
But if we think about parts of the company, this makes a ton of sense. And what I want to stress here is I think the domains help us enforce or let us hand off responsibility between teams. And I think there's a very large mistrust in businesses that don't allow, okay, I'm going to produce these tables. That is my responsibility. My responsibility ends at the table. Finance, you pick up the semantic model from there. Build what you want to build. You build it. You own it. But the idea is we will help you understand our data. We'll make sure our data is accurate. But there's a contract between us, the IT organization, and now you, the finance team. Here's what we're going to give you. This is our contract. It's going to be these columns, these tables. It's going to be correct. You do with it you will after the fact. And it's up to the business now to own that process. And if they fall apart and it goes to crap, they're on the hook for it. It's their responsibility. So I think there's this delegation of responsibility that has to happen inside these ecosystems.
And honestly, without the concept of subdomains, like, and because I want to completely agree, but without that concept of subdomains, it would not be, I think, what you're trying to reach for. But yeah, this could be achieved utilizing the domains and subdomains. That's actually a pretty good point to actually utilize not just business concepts, but what we're actually doing.
Awesome. Very good point. I want to keep going down. So I just want to kind of advance a little bit forward through here the article. We've been talking a lot about things. There is a lot of patterns on how to deploy environments of things. Most of the article, I would say the middle area of the article is all about patterns using Git, deployment, dev test prod. So there's a lot of images that are very relevant here, but there's a lot of unpacking in the middle section. And then the next section I think I really want to emphasize here just very briefly is how do you version control your changes? This is many different options depending on how big your team is, what they're comfortable with. Are you a SharePoint? Are you a OneDrive company? Do you have comfort in Git or Git integrations? Do you do this in Teams? Do you check in, check out files? I mean, these are things that I think I've been doing with teams for a long time now. This makes a ton of sense. And I really like that they've explained all the different patterns here that you could use, because some teams will be more comfortable using Git. Others will just be like, nah, we're just going to use SharePoint. And what I would say, if you're going to use SharePoint or OneDrive to store your files, I highly recommend you build a library collection that enforces check-in and check-out on all your files. It's a huge win to be able to have that detail included inside that file formatting. So I really like that. And also, if you go to SharePoint, you get an automatic versioning. I think depending on what your settings are in SharePoint, 100 versions of your file are just automatically saved. So you just save the file up with the same name. Boom, you just get 100 versions of it, and you can always roll back to previous versions, which is really, really nice. So I really like that.
And depending on your process, right? Like in those versions, you can add comments, right? So
that's true.
Almost like, you know,
if you use check in, check out, you can require that they make comments on things.
Correct.
Love it.
Which recommend that you do, because SharePoint stores versions. So what you can get into is like, okay, somebody made 10 version changes in a single day. Why?
What's going on? Right? What happened?
Which like in cases where you need to revert or find the old file, which one's the right one?
Yeah.
You know, with the fires I've been in, I'm happy to download 10 different versions in a single day just because I know I actually have it. But and like
better to
honestly,
have it than not.
Better to have it than on. That's an understatement. But the Git part here, I don't know how much we want to touch on this, because again, something I highlighted here to what we talked about before was they talk about all the Git integration, and then there's this little yellow bubble that says, warning, Git is currently in preview and not all features are supported.
Yes.
So I'm still struggling.
It's getting there. It's getting there. It's just,
so like I said, it's future state.
It's future state. Yeah.
I think what I do like here though is like they're outlining. The first one is what the vast majority of I think people use today. If you're using like get on this, it's so easy to get onto approach one. If you use SharePoint, get the version control going. You can do the OneDrive refresh if you want to. Don't even need to. Just get some sort of version control for what you're deploying, right? And then it's a gradual like, why do you want to do this? And then approach 2 ramps it up a little bit, throws in a little, remote repository, like then, so it's progressive. And I think the more progressive you go, Microsoft is actively working on ensuring that those advanced scenarios work super reliably for all use cases where, in 6 months or 3 months or whatever the case may be, you'd be able to look at this documentation, just rip through it and go to the hardest one and be able to implement it in that way.
Yep.
Does that mean you can't do that in today's world? No, but it requires somebody like Mike, right? An expert who understands this whole ecosystem to oversimplify and train you how to use things in a certain way. The challenge here is like when you're, to your point, I think earlier, Tommy, going to try to bring on a team and everybody's new to this. You don't understand the nuance and the pitfalls, which means you're going to hit a roadblock most likely, right? And you're not just going to implement something of challenge and complexity in your pipeline to deploy things unless there's value for you doing that, which is reliability. And that still goes back to the point at which, where is this really good to use? Where is it, potentially still not, an area you would implement until your team is so fluent that, this is a 5-minute addition. It's not, it's not adding hours or, people figuring out, and you're figuring out the break and the chain, or going back, and like, it's, I can't deploy something problem where we have been in the past, right? But like the tools and technologies, like if you guys were around in the IT technical sectors, where it's like, I'm straight SQL database, we're developing reporting and services reports, or God forbid you're using tabular models and Visual Studio business intelligence tools, like you're triaging and trying to figure out what the problem is just to get something deployed for hours.
Right.
Yes.
That can't happen anymore. Like, and I'm not saying we're there with this, but it needs to be a fluid process. And I think we'll get there, but some of the more advanced scenarios like require some of these tools to hit GA, and a lot of the standardization of not bopping around to different solutions, and just, here's how we do things. Here's a very clear path, and some training can be, done or developed, and bring people on to this, because the value add long term, especially for these high vis reports and models, is reliability. And you do need to bring that as a team to an organization for certain use cases. And these would be the ones, and why we're spending so much time talking about this.
When we do become GA with this, or this becomes more mature, I think this deserves a whole episode or a series around branching and Git, because you can't just do Git without the concept of branching.
Well, this is the art, the diagram or the image that's presented right after that little warning box that you gave, Timmy, is excellent. I really like this one.
Yeah.
The image is super good. It talks about the content creator. It talks about the local repo of like you building this is Kurt hand all over this. I can see this really, really well. This is amazing. This is exactly how it works. But the contrast to me is so stark between, I have a PBIX file and I save it to SharePoint, and then I look at the Git process. That's like 3 steps. Save, put in SharePoint, download, work on it, save, put in SharePoint, check in, check out. Like, that's simple. This process around Azure DevOps and Azure repos to use all this is way more complicated. And you'll know there's 12 or 14 steps in here of different things you can do. So the level of control drastically increases. The quality can be measured much more in detail. One thing I would really like to point out here is, I've been touting this concept of the release manager for months. I've been talking about, there's a person, there's a persona, there's an individual who's in charge of making content go from dev to test to prod. And there's an individual. This is the first documentation piece that I've seen where they're talking about the content creator, and then they're talking about the release manager. And I think we're finally having the right conversation. The release manager persona, this is someone who knows how to use Git, who knows how to move things through environments, who understands and can tap the team and say, we don't have merged pull request. We're not approving these changes. This is more of a PM/release manager, and their job is to move content between the different environments. This is incredibly important to note here, because I think Microsoft is finally catching on with the language of how this is supposed to work. So really like this article. All right. Let's do final thoughts. I think we've well gone over our time today. So any final thoughts?
I have no final thoughts. My final thought was before.
Seth is out of final thoughts. Tommy, anything for you?
No, I think the biggest thing is, and I think right to your point, Mike, Fabric is introducing a lot more, not just skills that we need to learn, but probably job roles or that morphing of job roles.
Call it personas, because I think job roles is a little bit too specific, because I'm not going to hire a release manager.
That's fair.
I'm going to say
ideal, but yeah, it's fair.
Yeah, I'm going to say, hey, you're a technical person. I'm going to add the release management skill to your repertoire. Yeah. Use that.
Yeah. And the last thing is, whatever you're doing right now, and if you're beginning this journey in Fabric, there's a lot of opportunity here for being invaluable, really being valuable in an organization with these different personas. This is going to, I think, Mike, this release manager concept, this persona is going to be critical for so many organizations as this becomes the de facto kind of solution.
I would agree. Yes. So I like that there is now options. So One, the develop and manage content article is very comprehensive. I think, Seth, your point in the very beginning of the article is extremely relevant. Please note, some of this stuff is not fully functional yet, and it's still getting worked out. But we're heading, I think, toward the right direction. So this article will stand, I think, the test of time just purely from this is how things potentially can work. There is probably, I would argue, there is rough points around deploying code from repos into dev test prod. It's not as smooth as it should be. And there's not enough examples out there to make it easy to deploy things programmatically in all those environments. So that's a little bit of a challenge for me right now. But I'm encouraged by the Power BI APIs are getting better, the documentation is getting better, and we have John Kursky. So John can take care of everything else. John can help us figure out all the details and the releasing and the pipelining. And so, I mean, as long as we have those three things, I think we're good to go and we'll figure it out. We'll have a good future. All right. That being said, thank you all very much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate your time. Hopefully unpacking this article was good for you. We really want and encourage you to go look at the article, spend some more time in it. It's highly recommended. You check it out and read this one thoroughly and see how this fits your team or what you're doing today in your team. Also, note that you're not going to do one of these patterns only. You'll probably have a mix of these patterns that you're going to build. That's fine. So with that being said, if you like this episode, if you found some value from it, please go share this with somebody else, or go give it to someone else who needs to learn how to do this stuff because they don't know how to do proper releasing of things and you keep breaking crap. So if you keep breaking stuff, maybe this article is the one for you. That being said, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Awesome. You're getting really good at that outro, Tommy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
It's only 200 times doing that.
300 times down, you finally got it, right? Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.